It's really interesting. When you and Nancy reached out to me about this program, I thought, well, I don't really have a spiritual practice. I'm not a spiritual person, right? And then I really started to reflect on it, and I thought, but of course I am, right? And so I think it's this modern day resistance that some of us, so many of us, have against this term of spirituality, or a spiritual path or a spiritual practice, because it feels woo woo, and yet it's so grounded in everything about who we are as human beings, right? It really is. We as humans, spirituality and spiritual practice is who we are. And really, what this is, in my opinion, how I define it, is that need that all of us have to feel like we are connected to something bigger than ourselves. Right? And it's I like to read and listen to Sam Harris, who is an atheist neuroscientist who is a mindfulness practitioner, and he's really very thoughtful. And he calls it transcending beyond the illusion of self and experience of oneness with the vastness of the universe, right? So there's the very dry, definition. But to me, it really almost has two dimensions. In addition to that connection, it's also this need to, in order to truly be a flourishing human being, to also connect with myself at a deeper level. I think somebody, talked about the divine inner self, right? We're trying to connect with, what is our real meaning and purpose? Why are we here? And what gives us meaning, what kind of imbues our lives with meaning. And so that, to me, so it's this journey for self wisdom, as well as this need to connect with the sense that we are all part of this vast greater thing. How about you, Nancy?
Yeah, I agree, completely agree with you, Robin. And I have to say, I could not have asked for a better co-speaker today than you. It's interesting. I was so grateful to Barbara when she introduced us years ago, because there's even just something about your voice itself is calming to me. And you have taught me and Barbara so much about being present and mindfulness. So thank you so much to you for being here today. And I think that there are many of you on this call today who know me and know me well, and know that my spirituality is so important to me. And I think for me, spirituality means living kind of from the inside out, if you will. Many of you also know that my faith is what sustains me. And I really try to live, have tried to evolve my spirituality to live from the inside out, to live from a place of gratitude, with just a deep belief, to your point, that I am here on this earth and a part of something so much bigger than myself. And so my faith and my core values and core beliefs really are core to my spirituality practice. And I've always been a spiritual person, and I attribute that to, I was raised Catholic as well. And I attribute it to my mom. My mother was a deeply spiritual person herself, and she passed along three values or traits that really are at the core of who I am, and that is my sense of optimism, my gratitude, and my faith. And whether you are Christian or practice Judaism or Hinduism or whatever it might be, I think that for me, having a deep sense of belief, trust, and knowing is so important, whether that's a belief in the universe, the divine, the greater good, a higher power, God, whatever it might be, is so important. And it's interesting because as I thought about my spirituality practice, I'll just share that it started probably back in 2016, if not, years before that, after I was divorced. But in 2016, I found myself very angry, and angry at what was going on in Washington. I was dealing with a family matter, and I was probably angry in as I think about it in all truth, angry at myself for some choices in my life, and I couldn't put things down. I was so aware that I was walking around with my whole shoulders hunched. My breathing was shallow. Not just my fists were clenched, but my whole body was. And it presented itself actually as shingles eventually. And I wanted peace in mind, body, and spirit. And I really realized that my public life and my private life were not aligned. So I really thought a lot about life and how I was feeling, how I was showing up, my mindset, my health. And as I looked back, and this is going to sound really silly, I was really distracted also. I constantly had something on in the background, whether it was the radio or the TV or AirPods in or something. And I was driving down US 1 here in Florida. And I decided simply to turn off the radio, just like for 10 minutes. And when I turned it off, the silence allowed me to truly hear myself. And, so when I think about a spirituality practice does not have to be this grand thing. It just can be an intention, Barbara, as you said, setting an intention and then being present in that calm, and in the presence of yourself. And it's evolved since then as well. But at its core, my spirituality practice is about my beliefs and how I show up.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think we all, I think the ground, was fertilized and the seeds were sown in
Yeah,
our childhood, right? At certain,
totally.
mine, is interesting. Was not raised a Catholic, but I got to go to a Catholic girls' high school. So I was Episcopalian, close enough. But it was really interesting because I didn't come from a spiritual family. But I can remember that kind of my seed was sown, or the hook, I think, was really ninth grade biology, Sister Deborah. And I remember asking her, how can you believe in the Bible and God and evolution too? How can you, as we're sitting here
Mm-hmm.
dissecting a frog?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And she goes, Robin, she goes, I believe that there was something that had to be the spark of the creation of universe and life, and that something is what we call God. And I went, oh wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And I don't think it kind of opened it up, right? And then, and sat there. And then like you, mine was the financial crisis, '08. I had a partial collapse of my right lung while sitting at my desk doing email. How stupid is that? Normally happens to 17-year-old tall, lanky guys. I was 55,
Wow.
52 years old when it happened. And I realized that it was the stress, right, of, it was like, just everything was kind of tumbling down at that point, in '08. And that I literally and figuratively needed to learn to slow down,
Yeah.
and breathe again, right? Like literally. So that was when I started my yoga practice, like Barbara, right? Like that was when I literally I started meditating. That was when I started to do practices
Mm-hmm.
that really helped me still my mind and see myself and the world around me a little bit more clearly, and learn as, and one of my favorite quotes is Victor Frankl. It's not a direct quote, but it's kind of a kind of how what his teachings teach us. that between stimulus and response, there is a space,
Yeah,
right? And in that space is our power to choose our response.
absolutely.
And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so that was like I needed to learn to create that sacred space or sacred pause
Hmm.
so that I could not only see myself, but I could see the world around me more clearly and put things in proper perspective, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is a really important skill right now.
I love that because it's, that's one of the things that I am still working on and probably will work on is in that place to actually take that action, that second to pause. And it's so hard because there's, again, so much stimulus around us, so many distractions. And one of the things that I've become more mindful of through my spiritual practice is the concept of time. I just had my 62nd birthday. And, when I was going through that that phase in 2016 and then even into 2019, it was just I was like just checking off the days. And so now I take time to truly notice my life, whether that's I am stepping outside or just I'm mindful of the conversations that I have with Barbara during the day because there are so many, there's just such connection with her and so much I learn from her that I'm so grateful for. Um, just so the concept of time that this day, this moment, this second, being here in the now versus just next, 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 and not always being in pursuit. So I think a lot about that as well.
Yeah, boy, I love this back and forth, and you've actually already talked on the benefits physically, right? And I think, I mean, Robin, I never thought I'd hear a quote from an atheist about spirituality, so that was super interesting to me. Um, but and this you mentioned the scientist, because there are actually some wonderful health benefits. Nancy, you said shingles triggered pursuit of this, so maybe Robin, you can start by sharing some of the physical and
Yeah.
mental benefits.
Absolutely. And so, just as background, so when I left the financial industry in 2012 and became an executive leadership coach, my fascination, I think, with emotional intelligence and mindfulness as the foundation of that, but I really got hooked with the science behind it. And so I've really spent the last 12, 13 years or so kind of following that thread down well, why do we do the things that we do, right? And what is it about the neurophysiology or the neurobiology of human beings that make us do what we do? And so, there are real physical, mental, and emotional benefits to having a spiritual practice. Whether or not that's mindfulness, yoga, prayer, it's calming, right? Chanting, walks in nature, experiencing awe. There's so many paths to a spiritual practice that can give us these benefits. But we start with mindfulness and prayer, but really kind of this mindfulness practice, which can be accomplished through meditation, but other ways too. Research has shown does three main benefits, and that is it helps us strengthen our attentional control, right? So we can focus better. And focus for humans since really the invention of the iPhone in 2008 has been fractured. And it's bad
Mhm.
enough for us ladies, but it's really bad for my grandson, right? And for younger kids. It's just that their ability to attend to anything for any length of time has really been undermined. And so that's one main benefit. It helps us focus on what's really important. It also helps us build self-awareness. right? So when we have a spiritual practice like meditation and yoga, we are able to develop this metacognition, which is getting, watching what's going on in our mind, watching, kind of getting out of the autopilot and really being able to see, oh, my mind has wandered, so I'll bring it back, right? Or, oh, I just went down this rabbit hole of anger and frustration. Let me see it for what it is and bring it back. So it helps us build the self-awareness of, what are emotional triggers? When do our emotions arise? This grounding in the body in the present moment really helps us. And then lastly, because we're more aware of our emotions as they arise, we can regulate them. So emotional regulation is a real benefit. And not only for our physical health, which I'll get into it in just a second, but in our ability to develop relationships too, right? I worked on a futures trading floor for 23 years. Ladies, I used to yell at people for a living, okay? I had to decompress when I went into an office afterwards and learned that I couldn't just like fly off the handle. What worked on the trading floor doesn't work in real life, certainly not with husbands and kids and friends and or colleagues. So this ability to create that sacred pause. And so the physical, so there's the like social and emotional benefits. Let's just talk about the physical benefit. Because we are able to manage our emotions, right, and regulate them, regulate what we call the allostatic load of our nervous system, we actually are able to reduce inflammation, activate our vagus nerve, which is really kind of the axis of our brain, our heart, and our gut. We have a lot of neurons in our heart and our gut, more in our gut, right? And so this is why, when we're anxious or depressed, we lose our appetite. It impacts, how our digestive system works. So any sort of digestive problems that might be attached to anxiety and depression are benefited and reduced. Inflammation, right? Any kind of autoimmune thing like shingles, right? Which I've had before because of stress as well, Nancy. And hypertension, high blood pressure, heart disease, insomnia, sex drive. We can, we can get it. Even some types of cancer, research has linked to our inability to manage our stress levels. And so, being able to manage this has real physical events that effects that can, really help us with our longevity, which is, the goal, right, is to help us with our longevity. And then, it also, from an emotional standpoint, it helps us because we're able to not only manage our emotions and connect with others, we have better relationships. We're going to flourish, right? And so and also this attachment to meaning and purpose, has research has shown, is part of what helps humans flourish. Martin Seligman, who wrote a book called Flourish, is a positive psychologist who has this, acronym PERMA of the 5 things that we need to have in our lives to help us really thrive and be happy. And that is positive emotions, being fully engaged in our work, doing things that we really, that flow feeling is the E. R is having good relationships. The M is meaning, right? That greater purpose. Meaning is meaningful to human beings. And the A is accomplishment. But meaning is at the core, and purpose are at the core of who we are. And yeah.
It's interesting. I was reflecting over the last few days about the physical and the mental benefits, and all of the things that you just mentioned in terms of the physical benefits were exactly what I had written down. For me, my blood pressure is stabilized. I have a greater ability to navigate challenges without my, cortisol going through the roof. My immune system is much stronger. I make healthier choices. Inflammation, is gone. I've eliminated certain things that have helped me do that. But the sense of my spirituality practice in establishing a much calmer and centered presence for myself. I mean, the physical benefits have really been, I had not only shingles, but I had psoriasis. And as soon
Mhm.
as I was able to put some things down and really get into a cadence of having a spirituality practice, all of that went away. And that doesn't mean to say that like I'm this calm Zen person all the time. Those who are on the phone and know me probably know that's not true as well. Um, but I am, because of it, able to ground myself and benefit from so many of those, physical changes in my life. Um, and then, of course, the mental ones. Um, I don't carry a lot. I don't carry that anger anymore. It's less mental clutter,
Mhm.
in my mind, and um, my internal narrative has changed. Um, so the mental benefits, and it's helped me really prioritize in my life what matters most to me, and to on a regular basis reflect on those things, versus the things that really don't matter to me. So, so I think the mental benefits of a spiritual practice, equal the physical benefits as well.
And
Oh, absolutely.
a lot of what you both are talking about also makes it so apparent how it helps us as we show up as professionals,
Mm,
right? I mean, um, owning my response versus a reaction, and just being grounded spiritually in terms of not judging what's going on, but just it is what it is, and also not turning into a victim and getting angry, right?
yeah.
How I guess what are some of the other ways professionally that you feel like it really benefits you, or I guess also Rob, and some of the people you work with, that as you incorporate a dynamic of this potentially in your work practice when you're coaching?
Yeah. So, well, when I looked at the question, which is, yeah, how does it impact? Well, I started with, well, first of all, my practice, my meditation and my mindfulness practice, and my really, path for my spiritual path changed the trajectory of my career. First of all, right? It completely changed the truth. I mean, I left because I really, after 4 or 5 years, really 3 or 4 years after 2008, I just started to really step back and ask myself what's most important in life,
Mhm.
and also it also changed how I was showing up at work too, in that space. But it really changed what am I doing, right? Life isn't permanent. I don't have forever, and what the heck am I doing with my life? And so, and I also recognized how miserable I was, right? So it changed the trajectory of my life. And now, as an executive and leadership coach, as a parent, as a wife, as a grandmother, and as a friend, it's changed how I show up as a human being. I use my mindfulness practices, and it's far beyond meditation. A lot of it's just grounding in your body, taking a few breaths and calming, activating the parasympathetic nervous system, so that I can calm, be centered and focused for a client meeting, right? So I can role model how they can learn to pause and stop and think about their response, right? There's a practice that I use with clients called the stop practice, right? Stop, take a breath, observe, and proceed, right? So I can role model and also share with my clients tools that they can use so that they can be they can show up as the best leader, right? Their best selves. And so yeah, that's, I mean, that's how I also share, just different grounding tools and kind of embodiment practices, particularly in the pandemic when we shifted to Zoom
Mm.
almost, and we still do so many of our meetings virtually. Well, you're sitting at a desk in front of a screen with your eyes laser focused all day, right? That this is not how we as humans were built to function. And so just sharing little practices of stand, broaden your shoulders, relax your gaze, let your shoulders relax, you know, um, ground yourself, feel your feet on the floor, and take a 5 minute or 10 minute walk outside, or even just stop and stare out at nature, at some pleasing thing. These are ways we can reset our nervous system and remind us, wow, okay, what's really important. I have a practice that's really simple that it's called 3 breaths, right? It's just, okay, the first breath, you're just feeling the breath and you're grounding yourself in the body. And the second breath, you're just really observing, where am I feeling tension, and where am I feeling stress, and let me relax those muscles. And then the third breath, it's, well, ask what's most important right now. So that gets me out of, oh, well, I just got busy, right? And I just went down this rabbit hole, responding to this email. But really, that's really not the most important thing for me to do right now. Well, what is? Maybe it's saying hello to my husband. Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
picking up the phone and engaging with somebody else, or maybe it's doing some deep thinking about something that's strategically important. So that's how not only has it affected me, but I try to share those tools with my clients. How about you,
So
Nancy?
I love that. I love the 3 breaths. And it's interesting because that's exactly what I did before dialing into the Zoom today. And I think, I'd like to think that my spiritual practice has impacted those I work with, those I serve, those I mentor, and that over the years that they have benefited from that and noticed it. And it's interesting because I think about how I start my morning matters so much. Um, my spiritual practice starts when I open my eyes in the morning, because the first 2 words out of my mouth are "thank you." And from there, like you, it could be a meditation. It's usually yoga or stretching. I'm a big fan of stillness. The longest that I have sat completely still is 27 minutes, like completely still with nothing but my breath. And being in silence is also part of my mindfulness practice. And it doesn't end there. um, my mindfulness practice, or my spirituality practice, continues throughout the day, because whether it's taking 3 breaths, or saying a prayer, or surrendering something, or a random act of kindness, like I don't just think about it at one point. And for me, and so it's really a combination of things, but for me, how it has informed my professional life. And the other thing I will mention is that, and I've said this, you know, to some of you on the phone before, that my peace is non-negotiable. And peace and calm are very different. For me, calm is a state, and peace is a presence. And I have been on the opposite side of peace. And I much enjoy my mind, my body, and my spirit being at peace. And I think about, to the question about how I show up at work, and I think it's allowed me to really show up from my core beliefs, and create space for others to be
Mm.
seen, to be heard, and to be appreciated. And I've also noticed that I used to listen to react, and now I listen more to understand or to empathize before reacting. And that was probably when I was in that not so great of a space in 2016 and 2019. But now I think that, being showing up empathetically and creating space for other people, um, is really so important. And I credit that a lot with the ability to ground myself before a conversation, with doing 3 breaths, whatever it might be. And Barbara made a point a few moments ago that I'm really mindful of how I am being, not just what I am doing or what I am saying, how that person is receiving me on the other end. And I'm hoping that it's authentically and open. And, from a big believer in leading with love, um, that I love the people that I work with. I am, truly invested in their success personally and professionally. And, in these days and times, especially, with so much going on, I think it's allowed me to show up a lot calmer under certain pressures.
And Nancy, that gift of just being fully present,
Mm.
right, with the intent of listening to understand is such a gift these days.
Yeah,
I mean, how often do we see people, or have we tried to have conversations with somebody throughout the day where they're multitasking? And,
exactly. Right.
we only have, part of their attention. And
Yeah.
how does that feel? Right. So, to your point, I am so guilty of that. I used to pride myself in being a multitasker, right? That was like what made me a great broker on the floor, right? I could multitask. And so it was really, I had to make that conscious effort to learn
Yeah.
to be still and to be fully present
Hmm.
and to let go of judgment. That's another thing that this
So true.
this has helped me do, and to really listen open, and with kindness and curiosity is
Hmm.
one of the definitions of mindfulness I love. It's with this attitude of kindness and curiosity instead of judgment.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and when you do that, you can see people change in front of your eyes when you are fully present, and when they feel heard fully, then they show up differently.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So our practice can actually impact other people.
Others. Hmm.
Yeah.
And I'd
So,
like to think that it has. So.
well, very much. Both of you have very much. The one thing I'd like you to both talk about, because, you this is a great program. Hearing you both, it's like, okay, I have got to do this, right? I have got to prioritize this. But I really think intentionality and ritual is so important to have. I mean, the power of a spiritual practice is when I feel for me is when I have that consistency and it's a ritual and I'm being intentional because it deepens it when there's intention behind it. Could you speak to how you've been able to create this consistent commitment to a practice?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start off. I guess for me, it was as silly as it sounds with that turning off of the radio, 9 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it was, and and I didn't focus on. I focused on the intention, but then afterwards I focused on how I felt, and so I find, again, the mornings are very important to me. And I find sitting outside with a cup of coffee, um, whether that is for, I'm not out there for hours. It could be 5 minutes. It could be 50 minutes. It could be, whatever, 30 minutes. Um, but it's spirituality is a daily choice. And I think the importance is honoring yourself and choosing yourself at the start of the day to anchor or ground yourself. Um, and then throughout the day, I'm spiritual in my car. I'm spiritual when I'm walking Chauncey. Whether that's I'm listening to, I have this calm Bible verses or reciting things. I mean, I'm constantly talking to myself. Um, or just finding spirituality in a yoga stretch or in the gift that your body is a miracle. But for me, Barbara, it really is the start of my day and carving out 1 minute, 10 minutes, whatever it might be. And I think they say after 21 days, you create a habit. And if you can't do it in the morning, be mindful of not to Robin's point, don't judge yourself. That's okay. So maybe you find 5 minutes before you get out of your car for work, or before you take your kid to soccer, or before you sit down for your dinner with your family. Um, it is really just where it's going to fit best with you. There is no right way. There's no wrong way. There's no right time or wrong time. It's really whatever resonates and feels right to you. That's how I see it. Robin, what do you think?
Yeah, yeah. So many things here. So, my journey really did start with a meditation practice. And
Hmm.
I, like you, was just really intent upon changing my physical health,
Yeah.
lowering my stress levels, but also, just really creating that calm and peace, right? So I, kind of use the habit stacker, right, to make it. I wish I
I
could
love
say,
that.
oh, I set this lovely intention. But you know what? I kind of said, well, you know what? I get up every morning, I brush my teeth, I make my bed, then I'll meditate. And I kind of stacked it as a habit. And at first, I really was very disciplined about, I started, I think, with 5, worked up to 10 minutes, and then to
Right.
15, and then to 20. Over the last few years, I have been a little less disciplined about meditating every morning. But what I do is like today, it was I'm in Florida, sorry ladies. It was a beautiful morning this morning. It was sunny, it was like 62 degrees, and I thought, this would be a beautiful morning for a mindful walk, right? So there are other ways that I incorporate mindfulness, that I've really embraced and embodied over the last 15 years. So like Nancy, I incorporate it through my day.
Yeah.
It can
Me
be
too.
start with meditation,
Yeah.
but I practice mindful walks where I will take my AirPods out and
Yeah.
just observe. I listen to the birds.
Hmm.
I look at the cloud formations. I did that this morning. I go to the beach and I look at the ocean and the waves and the vastness of it. And really, in this particularly walks in nature, what I'm looking for is that emotion of awe, which does things like, activates dopamine and
Yeah.
reward systems in our brain and makes us feel good. And and so that this kind of emotion of awe, which can be another spiritual path, right?
Hmm.
I do things like before a meeting, like you do. I take a few breaths, I center myself. um, I also at night, I'm a big reader when I go to bed. So, I'll take a moment to read, maybe, a chapter or from one of my favorite old, well-thumbed books that I kind of lean to Buddhist writings, that just are, but a little bit more secular in the Buddhism, right? That are just
Hmm.
reminders of, hey, that life isn't permanent, but we don't have to, and suffering is inevitable, pain is inevitable, but we don't have to suffer, right? And so, so I do some kind of spiritual reading and yeah, so, and reflection, gratitude journaling is
Yeah.
something that I know, Barbara, how do you, Barbara, I know you have
Yeah.
some practices. How do you do it?
I do. Well, I do love the podcast Signs of Happiness. And there was one episode where they just told you to lie down and look in the sky. And so I was walking around the block and I came back and I just went into the backyard and I'm just lying down on the ground looking up. And I feel like a kid, which was made it really fun too. But it was the awe, right? It was just
Yeah. Uh,
pausing and looking up and just enjoying that. Now that, in Chicago, we can't do that as often as Nancy can. You can do it in Florida right now. But so, I do really connect with nature quite a bit. I do know when I'm up in Michigan, my shoulders just drop right when I arrive. It's different than a more urban environment. But I have a loving kindness meditation that I do. And then for myself, and then I'll do it for a few people in my life. And I actually customize the words. And I find if I just repeat it quickly, it's so different than when I pause and I feel the emotion of each word. And I really connect with that word. And I feel like it's a gift to the person. And then of course it's a gift back to me, right?
Hmm.
So, but my biggest weakness, which I forgive myself already for, is I know I can benefit like of doing that midday pause. I used to have an alarm go off on my phone, but I just ignored it and I didn't really use it. But I feel like at least I get grounded in the morning and then off to the races. And I think you just pausing it one intentionally pausing. Not that I don't pause. I think it actually would really help my productivity as well. And I could easily incorporate that into grabbing a glass of water or having lunch, just pausing. And so I'm going to commit. That's what I'm going to commit to right now is that intentionality of working amid some type of pause throughout the day, not just that gift I
Hmm.
give myself in the morning, probably.
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah.
And
What's fun is, oh, sorry, Nancy. I
no,
was
go
just
ahead,
going to
Robin.
add, build on that. What's fun is to mindfully eat when you're having lunch, right? If you're by yourself, which I work from home, so sadly I'm by myself a lot of times, but literally instead of resist the impact of looking at your phone and catching up on the news, which is, just to stop and think about, really not only the flavor and the texture of the food you're putting in my mouth, but where did this come from? Who grew this apple? Where did where did this, who made this chicken salad? Whatever, right?
Right,
Like it
right.
really is, and to your point, it kind of builds on the gratitude. You can, be thankful and it creates this lovely feeling, right? Of just being fully in the present moment.
And I think it also creates the sense of just the abundance that we have in our lives and the gifts that we have. And to your point, as you just said, it is, it grounds us. And, for me, I love that Barbara does the loving kindness meditation. And I know that I am the benefit of that at certain times, for which I'm so blessed. But I also, one of the things that I remind myself of during the day, or I think the two most important words that we can say to ourselves are I am. And I am safe. I am blessed. I am abundant. I am, thankful. And just, I am present, whatever it might be. And when you step outside, the whole concept of self-awareness, I think my self-awareness has evolved over the last several years. And the whole concept, Barbara, as you said, looking up the stars and just pausing to notice the life around us,
Yeah.
and before we get on to the next thing. And the breath that we have is the life that sustains us, is just something that I try to focus on more, is just noticing the life that is around us and around me. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Building that awareness is so important. The first mindfulness resource we had for the Women's Forum, Nancy and I hosted her for lunch after the event, and we literally sat down, and Nancy and I had finished our breakfast, and she just started with her fruit, and she paused and talked about a mindfulness practice with her eating, and just looked at this piece of fruit and talked about the growers, where it was from, her gratitude for all the work, the energy from the sun, the work that it took to create it, and just the server bringing it to the table. I mean, it was excessive, right? But it made such a strong point. And it actually, that is good for your digestion also, right? When you
Right.
prime your system for that. But it also, usually, I'm grabbing food just to get on to my next thing. But just some of those little pauses can be pretty powerful too.
So true. Yeah.
Anything that we haven't talked about that you would like Nancy or Robin to offer shed more light on?
I guess I would just, there's a lot going on in the world right now. And, with family and careers and commitments to community or whatever it might be, I know that a spiritual practice can be really powerful. So find one activity, maybe, even if it's just for a minute, to ground yourself in gratitude and try to create some type of cadence or rhythm for yourself. The flow of life is all around us, and one of my favorite sayings, and Barbara and I say this on a daily basis, is that we just really have to focus on what we can control. And we can control our thoughts, we can control our attitude, we can control the choices that we're making and how we're showing up. So I just hope that all of you have taken something away. Robin, how about you? What would you?
Yeah. So, just I think this is such an important thing right now, just to help us really stop and put everything that's going on in the world in perspective as well. I think one of the things that came to mind while you were talking, and particularly about you and Barbara both about the gratitude practice and be thankful for, we have to remember that our nervous system, and from an evolutionary biology perspective, we have a negativity bias that was wired into our beings. So we're always picking up on the negative in the world, and, that creates fear. I think, so we have to really make an extra effort and savor noticing what's good and what's positive, whether or not it's with a colleague or with just what's going on in the world. And so when we do that, there's a practice in the awe book that we're going to recommend about awe, that is just simply called an awe practice, and it's kind of like the 3 breaths. But the importance is it helps rewire your nervous system. So, when you're out walking the next time, even if it's in the city, I walk through Lincoln Park. I love walking through Lincoln Park when I'm in Chicago. It's just be aware, right? Notice something beautiful or something that you're really grateful for. And the A is be aware, right? Notice. And the W, bring attention to it. Really notice the details of it. Think about, well, wow, this is really special. The W is then, kind of that wait, slow down, pause, and really savor. And then the E is then expand on that, right? Exhale, take a breath, and really, kind of stay with that, linger, if you will, and amplify those sensations, noticing what emotions, those positive emotions that it elicits in your body. What a great way to counteract the fear in the world, right? Of the negative emotions is to just, do these things in nature. Or even when you're at the symphony and hearing a lovely piece of music or whatever,
So true.
right? And practicing truly this awe, right, of savoring these positive experiences so that we can rewire the negativity to notice more of the good. That's what a gratitude practice does. It's what loving kindness meditation helps us do, right? So I really love these practices right now.